Hey everyone. Today we're going to talk about how humanity started inventing enemies. Picture this. It's late at night, you're scrolling through your feed and suddenly you stumble upon a video. Who really runs the world? Now, you know it's probably nonsense. You're an adult, you're educated, and you're a critical thinker. At work, you double-check every fact, you demand sources, and you analyze the data. But right now it's late, you're tired, and your finger is already tapping that play button. Just out of curiosity, you tell yourself, I'll just see what kind of stories they're spinning this time. And an hour later you're Googling, Bilderberg Club full member list. What just happened? Today we're going to trace the history of conspiracy theories, from medieval fears of secret orders to modern-day digital rabbit holes. From the Jesuits, who supposedly pulled the strings in royal courts, to QAnon, which turned conspiracism into a massive online game. We'll see how conspiracies became weapons of genocide, how intelligence agencies invented them themselves, and why even the most absurd theories find millions of believers. But first, a quick disclaimer. We're going to analyze the phenomenon of conspiracy theories, their psychology and their evolution. This doesn't mean that real conspiracies don't exist. History is full of genuine covert operations that seemed like paranoia at first but later became proven facts. At the same time, the classic rule of conspiracism goes like this. If there's no evidence, it means they hid it well. If there is evidence, then that evidence is part of the conspiracy itself. So, we're going to try and figure out not just what's true and what isn't, but why certain stories become popular at specific times, and why our brains crave simple villains instead of a messy, complex reality. Now let's get comfortable. Fluff your pillow, dim the lights, and settle in for a long story, because we're about to go on a journey through centuries of paranoia, fear, and the search for control. If you like what you hear, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. And hey, drop a comment about which historical mysteries or riddles fascinate you. Your idea might just become the topic of our next video. So, let's start with a time when the world still made sense. Back when it was clear who was a friend and who was an enemy. Back when God was in heaven, the king was on the throne, and you knew exactly where you fit in. And then something broke. Imagine 16th century Europe. The scent of incense in Catholic cathedrals mixes with the smoke from Protestant pyres. The sound of church bells is drowned out by the screams of heretics in the public squares. You touch the wooden pews in the church, they're cold, damp with night dew and fear. The world is splitting in two and no one understands how it happened so fast. The Reformation shattered what seemed eternal. The Protestants broke away from Rome, and the Catholic Church hit back by creating the Jesuit order in 1534. The Society of Jesus, founded by Ignatius of Loyola, had a clear goal: bring the Protestants back to the fold. They were educated, disciplined, and influential. They advised kings, raised princes, and taught in universities. And that's exactly why people started to fear them. Protestants looked at the Jesuits and saw something sinister. Here were men who swore absolute loyalty to the Pope. Men who infiltrated royal courts, whispering into the ears of rulers and teaching their children. What if they're actually running everything? What if every royal decree is actually decided by a black-robed Jesuit? It felt logical. The perfect plan for world domination. The first great conspiracy theory of the early modern era was born. The Jesuits became the symbol of this secret hand, guiding visible power. In France, England, and the German lands, pamphlets spread like wildfire. They claimed the Jesuits were orchestrating royal assassinations, fueling wars, and poisoning Protestants. Even when a Jesuit had absolutely nothing to do with an event, the suspicion fell on the order. Why the Jesuits? Because they were a convenient explanation. The world was changing way too fast. The old religious unity was falling apart. Kingdoms were at war over faith. And instead of admitting that the world had become complex and confusing, people found a simple answer. There's a secret force organizing all of this. It's not the chaos of history or economic shifts or random chance. It's an evil plan. Psychologically, that's much more comforting. Because if the world is run by a secret hand, at least the world has a meaning. Why didn't this fear vanish even after the Pope dissolved the Jesuits in 1773? Imagine Bavaria, 1776. The smell of book dust in a university library, where a young professor named Adam Weishaupt is dreaming up something grand. You can hear the rustle of the paper as he writes down the statutes of a brand new society. Weishaupt was a man of the Enlightenment. He wanted to change the world, to free it from the suffocating grip of the church and absolute monarchs. He wanted to promote reason, science, and equality. But he knew that saying these things out loud in conservative Bavaria was a one-way ticket to prison. So he went underground. He created a secret society with ranks, code names, and complex rituals. He was Spartacus, and his goal was to infiltrate existing institutions and steer them toward the light of reason. At its peak, the Order of the Illuminati had maybe 2,000 members. They were influential, sure, doctors, lawyers, even some low-level nobles. But they weren't the world-shattering force we imagine today. In fact, they were kind of a mess. Internal squabbles and ego trips were constant. And then, just 9 years after it started, the whole thing collapsed. The Bavarian government found out about them, banned secret societies, and the Illuminati were dismantled. Weishaupt fled and the order simply ceased to exist. But here's where it gets interesting. Even though the actual Illuminati were gone, the idea of them was just getting started. A few years later, the French Revolution exploded. The old world was burning. The king was guillotined, the church was stripped of power, and everything people thought was stable was gone. People were terrified. They needed to know, who did this? And then authors like Abbé Barruel and John Robison stepped in with a revelation. They claimed it wasn't the hungry peasants or the changing economy. No, it was the Illuminati. They argued that the order hadn't died in Bavaria. It had gone even deeper underground, infiltrated the Freemasons, and orchestrated the entire French Revolution to destroy civilization. This was the birth of the New World Order blueprint. The fear wasn't about a specific religious group anymore. It was about an invisible elite, an international network working in the shadows to take down everything you hold dear. Why did people believe this? Because a secret society of geniuses is much easier to wrap your head around than the terrifying truth that history is often driven by chaotic forces, mass movements, and unpredictable social shifts. It's much scarier to think that no one is in control than to think that someone, even someone evil, is at the wheel. As the 19th century rolled in, these fears started to mutate. They became darker and more dangerous. Conspiracy theories weren't just about politics anymore. They began to target specific ethnic and social groups, turning paranoia into a tool for state-sponsored violence. The world was about to enter an era where a shared delusion could lead to real-world catastrophes. The touch of a wax seal, warm, soft, leaving its mark on an envelope filled with secret correspondence. The sound of footsteps in the hallway, could it be a spy? Weishaupt founds the Order of the Illuminati, a secret society aimed at enlightenment, fighting religious obscurantism and absolutism. They meet in secret, use code names. Weishaupt himself is Spartacus, and write to each other in ciphers. It's got all the classic trappings of a secret order: rituals, hierarchy, and conspiracy. But there's a catch. The order only lasted for 10 years. In 1784, the Elector of Bavaria banned all secret societies. The Illuminati fell apart. Weishaupt fled, went into hiding, and died in obscurity in 1830. The organization was gone. Its influence had been minimal, just a few hundred members, mostly intellectuals, and zero real power. And this is where the miracle happens. A few years after the Illuminati were banned, the French Revolution explodes across Europe. The guillotine is working day and night, kings are losing their heads, and the old order is crumbling. And someone has to be to blame. It couldn't be the economic crisis or social contradictions, or the ideas of the Enlightenment. No, it had to be a secret order that planned the whole thing. In 1797, Abbé Barruel publishes his book, Memoirs Illustrating the History of Jacobinism. Everything is laid out clearly. The French Revolution was organized by the Illuminati, who had infiltrated Masonic lodges and were pulling the strings from the shadows. Royal heads weren't falling because the people were hungry and angry, but because of a secret plan for world domination. The book became a bestseller. It was translated, rewritten, and quoted everywhere. The Illuminati, who hadn't even existed for 20 years, suddenly became the most dangerous force in the world. They were seen everywhere, in every revolution, every political coup, every crisis. They became immortal overnight because you can't debunk a dead organization. Survival bias works perfectly here. We remember the Illuminati not because they were actually influential, but because their name became a symbol. How many other secret societies existed at the same time and vanished without a trace? Dozens. But the Illuminati survived in cultural memory as a myth, not a reality. And that myth lives on to this day, in movies, books, and internet forums. An organization that existed for a decade in the 18th century supposedly still runs the world in the 21st. But if the Illuminati were a fiction, who became the next scapegoat? Picture a Masonic lodge. London, the 18th century. The smell of tobacco smoke and fine wine. The sound of the master's wooden gavel opening the session. You touch the symbols on the walls, the compass, the square, the all-seeing eye, all woven into intricate patterns. You feel the chill of the marble floor under your feet as you walk to your place among the brothers. The Masons were everything the Illuminati weren't. They existed officially. They didn't hide. The first Grand Lodge was founded in London in 1717, and Freemasonry spread quickly through Europe and America. The lodges included influential people, aristocrats, merchants, intellectuals. They did charity work, discussed philosophy, and supported each other in business. You might ask, what could be suspicious about a public society? But it was their very publicity that ruined them. When the French Revolution swept away the monarchy, someone had to be at fault. Barrow blamed the Illuminati, but the Illuminati didn't exist anymore. However, the Masons were right there, alive, real, and influential. And so, they became the next target. Supposedly, the Masons had infiltrated governments, armies, and churches. Supposedly, they were directing revolutions across Europe. Supposedly, they had a plan to destroy Christianity and establish a new world order. The accusations were absurd, but they worked. Masons were blamed for everything: spreading atheism, undermining monarchies, conspiring against the church. Even when a specific Mason was a loyal citizen, a devout Christian, or a monarchist, the suspicion wouldn't go away. Because that was the plan, to hide in plain sight. Interestingly, Masons were accused by opposing sides. Conservatives saw them as revolutionaries. Revolutionaries saw them as traitors to the cause. Catholics thought they were anti-Christian. Protestants thought they were papal agents. Jews suspected them of Christianization. Christians suspected them of Judaization. When everyone is accusing you of opposite things, it only means one thing: you're being used as a screen to project your own fears. Freemasonry became a universal explanation. Revolution? Masons. Economic crisis? Masons. War? The Masons planned it. Peace? The Masons planned that too, but for a different reason. It's the perfect conspiracy theory, one that's impossible to debunk because every argument can be twisted. And again, it's survival bias. How many other societies existed back then? Dozens? Hundreds? But it's the Masons who survived in the conspiratorial mind. Imagine Europe in the mid-19th century. The smell of printers' ink in newspaper offices that now publish daily. The clicking of telegraph machines sending news across continents in hours instead of weeks. You touch a fresh newspaper. The paper is still damp, the ink smudging on your fingers. You read headlines about revolutions, constitutions, and parliaments. The world has changed again. But this time the changes are different. These aren't religious wars anymore. This is politics. Conspiracy theories evolved right along with the world. In the 16th and 17th centuries, conspiracies were religious. Jesuits versus Protestants, the Pope versus Reformers, good versus evil. A struggle for souls, for salvation, for the one true faith. Even when it was about power, it was justified through religion. The king ruled by divine right, and his enemies were servants of the devil. But in the 18th and 19th centuries, something shifted. The Enlightenment, revolutions, secularization. Power was increasingly justified not by God, but by the will of the people, the social contract, and reason. And conspiracy theories became secular too. The Illuminati and Masons weren't accused of heresy anymore, but of undermining the state, not of spreading a false faith but of organizing revolutions. Even when religious rhetoric was used, they're against Christianity, the real fear was political, that secret forces would topple the legitimate government, establish a new order, and seize power. Conspiracies stopped being about saving your soul. They became about control over society. And this was a critical shift. Because a religious conspiracy is metaphysical, the world of spirits and demons, something far removed from everyday life. But a political conspiracy is here and now. It's your neighbor who might be an agent. It's your colleague who might belong to a lodge. It's the government that might be taking orders from someone else. Paranoia became closer, simpler, and because of that, much scarier. The 19th century brought another innovation: mass communication. Newspapers, pamphlets, leaflets. Now, a conspiracy theory could be spread not just by whispers in the market, but by the printed word in thousands of copies. And if conspiracism was once the business of small groups, it was now becoming a mass ideology. The world became more complex. Industrialization, urbanization, migration, capitalism. Who is behind all this? Who is profiting? Who is controlling processes that an ordinary person doesn't understand? Surely it's someone secret and powerful? Surely it's a conspiracy? And this is where a new character enters the stage. Not an order, not a lodge, but a race. Because the most terrifying weapon of the 19th century wasn't a cannon, it was the idea that some people are hostile by nature. Imagine London, Paris, or Vienna in the early 19th century. The smell of coal and machine oil in the new factories. The sound of steam engines replacing manual labor. You walk into a bank. Marble columns, heavy doors with bronze handles that feel cold to the touch. Behind the window, a cashier is counting gold coins, and their clinking sounds like a promise of stability. But is it really? The Industrial Revolution didn't just change production. It changed money. Before, wealth was easy to understand. Land, crops, livestock. You could see who was rich. They had the castle, the estate, the servants. But now there were banks, stock exchanges, shares, and credit. Abstract finance that an ordinary person couldn't grasp. Someone could become a millionaire in a year without owning a single piece of land, just by playing with money. Someone could go bankrupt in a day because of a market crash thousands of kilometers away. And the main question, who controls this money? In the popular imagination, a new enemy figure emerged, the banker. Not just a rich person but the one who controls the flow of money. The one who gives loans to governments, finances wars, and influences the economies of entire countries. And if you look at the most influential banking dynasties in Europe at the time, many of them shared one trait. They were Jewish families. Why did Jews end up in the banking business? The history is bitter and simple. In the Middle Ages, Christians were forbidden from practicing usury, lending money at interest. It was considered a sin. Jews were also forbidden from owning land, joining guilds, or practicing most trades. They were left with only a few professions where church bans didn't apply: trade, finance, and loans. For centuries, Jews were forced into moneylending, and then they were blamed for being moneylenders. By the beginning of the 19th century, certain Jewish families had indeed become influential financiers. The Rothschilds, for instance, were lending money to European monarchs, financing the construction of railroads and trading on the stock exchanges. They were successful, they were visible, and they were influential, and that made them the perfect target. When the economy was doing well, they were envied. When a crisis hit, they were blamed. People said the bankers got rich off of war, that they manipulated prices, and that they controlled governments through debt. Part of this was true. Yes, they provided loans. Yes, they influenced the economy. But out of these facts grew a fantasy, that there was a single, unified conspiracy of Jewish bankers who were secretly running global finance to destroy Christian nations. It sounds absurd, but in the 19th century this became a popular theory. And the scariest part is that this theory didn't just vanish. It mutated, it evolved, and in the 20th century, it became the foundation for the most horrific forgery in history, a forgery that killed millions. Imagine living in a world that suddenly stopped making sense. You wake up and everything that felt stable yesterday is crumbling today. The smell of morning coffee, the sound of church bells, the touch of familiar things, it's all there, but everything around you has changed. Your faith is under threat, your king has been toppled, and your job has vanished because of some new machine. Your money has lost its value because of a stock market crash you never even heard of. What do? You look for an explanation. And the simplest explanation is a conspiracy. The first chapter of our story showed how conspiracy theories are born. They don't appear in a vacuum. They show up at moments of crisis, when the old world is breaking down and the new one hasn't become clear yet. The Reformation destroyed religious unity, so the Jesuit conspirators appeared. The Enlightenment undermined absolutism, so the Illuminati appeared. The French Revolution destroyed monarchies, so the Masonic conspirators appeared. Capitalism created confusing finances, so the banker conspirators appeared. Every era created its own enemy. Every crisis gave birth to its own conspiracy. But why conspiracies instead of just admitting things are complicated? Why not just say the world is complex, multi-layered, chaotic, and that no one is actually in total control? Why does the brain look for a secret hand? Because psychologically it's so much easier. A conspiracy provides structure. It turns chaos into a narrative. It explains why bad things happen to good people. It provides an enemy you can hate instead of abstract socioeconomic processes. And most importantly, it gives you back a sense of control. If there's a conspiracy, that means it can be exposed, stopped, and defeated. If the world is just chaotic, then you're helpless. Conspiracy theories aren't about logic. They're about comfort. And then there's survivor bias. We remember the Jesuits, the Illuminati, and the Masons not because they were the most powerful secret organizations, but because their names survived in our culture as symbols. How many hundreds of other orders, societies, and groups existed at the same time and vanished without a trace? But these specific ones survived because they became convenient labels for our fears. The early modern period created a template. And now, that template would be used as a weapon. Because in the 20th century, conspiracy theories would stop being just an explanation. They would become a justification for genocide. How exactly does that transition from paranoia to mass murder happen? Imagine Paris, 1815. The smell of damp stone after the rain on streets where Napoleon's troops were marching just yesterday. The sound of courier horses galloping with news from the battlefield at Waterloo. You walk into a banking office. The wooden floor creaks under your feet, and the ink in the inkwell is cold and thick as you sign a promissory note. Outside the window, people are gathering around newsstands, hungrily reading the updates. Who won? Napoleon or the Allies? The price of bonds, the price of gold, and the price of your entire future depend on the answer. And this is where the legend begins. According to the story, Nathan Rothschild received the news of Napoleon's defeat before anyone else in London, thanks to a network of couriers and carrier pigeons. While others were still waiting for the results of the battle, he was already trading on the stock exchange, knowing exactly how the prices would shift. One night and millions in profit. Is it true? Partially. The Rothschilds did have a fast communication system. They did get rich by financing wars and trading bonds. But a fantasy grew out of this fact. The fantasy went like this. The Rothschild family controls the finances of all of Europe. They provide loans to governments and, by doing so, they run politics. They manipulate stock market prices. They start and end wars based on their own profit. And most importantly, they are Jewish, which means they are part of a global Jewish conspiracy against Christian nations. Why did bankers specifically become the symbol of the conspiracy? Because in the 19th century, money became something people didn't understand. How could someone get rich without producing anything physical? Just by playing with numbers on paper? For a peasant who worked the land all his life or a worker at a factory machine, this felt like magic. Dark magic. And when an economic crisis hit, and they hit regularly because capitalism hadn't learned how to regulate itself yet, someone had to be at fault. Not abstract market mechanisms, not overproduction, not speculative bubbles, but specific people. The bankers. The ones in the suits with the accents and the names people couldn't pronounce. The banker conspiracy theory was perfect because it explained everything with one simple formula. Someone controls the money, which means someone controls the world. There's no need to understand economics, credit, or the stock market. Just know there is a secret force and it's against you. But that was just the beginning. The real fruit would appear when someone took this theory and framed it as proof. When someone forged a document that supposedly revealed a plan for world domination. When paranoia became official state doctrine. And that happened in Russia at the start of the 20th century. Imagine St. Petersburg, 1903. The smell of printer's ink mixes with cigarette smoke in the offices of the newspaper Znamya. The sound of the printing press pounding out page after page of a text that will change history and kill millions. You touch the freshly printed brochure. The paper is rough, cheap, and the ink smudges on your fingers. You read the title, The Protocols of the Meetings of the Learned Elders of Zion. A chill runs down your spine. What if this is actually true? But it isn't. It's a fake. It is one of the deadliest forgeries in human history. The protocols are supposedly transcripts of secret meetings held by Jewish leaders, discussing a plan for world domination, how they will infiltrate governments, the media, and banks, how they will undermine Christian morality, spark revolutions, and establish their own rule. 24 protocols, a detailed, paranoid, and malicious plan to destroy the Goys, meaning non-Jews. Who wrote them? Agents of the Russian secret police, the Okranka. What? To justify pogroms, distract people from social problems, and blame Jews for all the troubles of the empire. It's a classic tactic. When the people are unhappy with the Tsar, point them toward an enemy they can hate without consequences. The protocols were cobbled together from different sources. Part of it was plagiarized from an 1864 French satirical pamphlet written against Napoleon III. That original text didn't say a single word about Jews. It was just a critique of a tyrant. Other parts were pure invention, mixed with anti-Semitic tropes that had been circulating in Europe for centuries. It's like taking a bunch of conspiracy theories from Reddit, seasoning them with hate, and passing them off as classified documents. The forgery was crude, inconsistent in style, and factually absurd. In 1921, the British newspaper The Times ran an investigation and proved it was a fake. A Swiss court in 1935 officially recognized the protocols as a forgery and banned their distribution. But it was already too late. Because the protocols did something no conspiracy theory had ever done before. They became documentary evidence. Not rumors, not suspicions, not philosophical musings, but a supposedly real text written by the conspirators themselves. It was as if someone had eavesdropped on a secret meeting of villains and recorded every word. And even when people proved it was a fake, the believers just said, Of course they deny it, that's just part of the conspiracy. It's the classic logical trap of conspiracism. If there's evidence, it's proof. If there's no evidence, it's being hidden. If there's a debunking, that's also part of the conspiracy. The protocols were translated into dozens of languages. They were printed in Germany, France, England, the US, and Arab countries. Henry Ford, the American industrialist, even sponsored their mass publication in America. Tsarist Russia used them to justify pogroms. And then came the Nazis. For the Nazis, the protocols weren't just propaganda. They became the foundation for the Holocaust. Because if Jews were truly planning to destroy the Aryan race, then exterminating them wasn't a crime, it was self-defense. Imagine Germany in 1933. The smell of paper and printer's ink in a bookstore where Adolf Hitler's Mein Kampf sits in the window. The sound of SA boots marching in the streets. You touch a swastika armband, rough wool, red, black, and white. You feel something shift in the air. The smell of fear, masked by forced enthusiasm. Your Jewish neighbor doesn't say hello anymore. And you? You aren't even sure if you should say hello to them. Adolf Hitler read the protocols of the elders of Zion and believed in them completely. Or at least he pretended to, it didn't really matter. To him, they were the ideological bedrock. In Mein Kampf, he was very clear. Jews weren't just a religious or ethnic group. They were a racial enemy, conspiring against the Aryan race. According to his logic, they controlled both capitalism and communism. They were undermining morality through art, science, and the media. They were parasites destroying the nation from within. And if Germany wanted to survive, the Jews had to be removed. This was not just rhetoric. This was the preparation for mass murder. Nazi propaganda churned out the protocols by the millions. They were taught in schools, quoted in newspapers, and used in court trials. When the Swiss court declared them a forgery in 1935, the Nazis simply ignored the verdict because they didn't want the truth. They wanted a convenient lie. And here's the terrifying part. The conspiracy theory stopped being an explanation for problems. It became the justification for their solution. Germany didn't lose World War I because of military blunders, economic exhaustion, or the blockade. It was a stab in the back by the Jews. The 1920s economic crisis? Not because of reparations and inflation, but because of Jewish bankers. Social instability? Not because of unemployment and poverty, but because of a Jewish conspiracy. And if the Jews are the source of all evil, then the Holocaust isn't a crime, it's self-defense. It's the final solution to the Jewish question. 6 million dead. Ghettos, concentration camps, gas chambers. And all of it happened under the banner of fighting a conspiracy. We aren't going to describe the horrors of the Holocaust here. This isn't that kind of video, and it's not that kind of format. But it's vital to understand one thing. This didn't happen because the Nazis were just insane. It happened because a conspiracy theory gave them a moral justification. It turned victims into enemies. It made genocide look like the logical result of protecting the nation. Conspiracy theories kill. Not metaphorically. Literally. And even after the fall of the Third Reich, even after the Nuremberg trials, the protocols didn't just vanish. They're still being printed, still being read, and still being used today. In certain countries, in certain political movements, and on certain internet forums. But the West had learned its lesson. After World War II, conspiracy theories became suspicious and dangerous. So they mutated. They stopped being about race and started being about power, control, and the system. And the main battlefield for this was America. Imagine Washington, D.C., 1961. The smell of polished wood in the Oval Office of the White House. The sound of camera flashes as President Dwight D. Eisenhower prepares for his farewell address to the nation. You touch the script of his speech, official paper with the presidential seal, the words carefully chosen. You read one paragraph and realize this phrase is going to become legendary. We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence by the military-industrial complex. The military-industrial complex, the MIC. A symbiosis of the military, defense corporations, and politicians who profit from wars. Eisenhower, a general from World War II, knew exactly what he was talking about. After 1945, the U.S. didn't fully demobilize. The Cold War began. Defense contracts worth billions of dollars. Factories churning out weapons. Politicians lobbying for bigger military budgets. Generals retiring only to join the boards of directors of defense companies. This was reality. It was documented, obvious, and official. And here's where it gets interesting. When a president publicly warns about a danger, it's no longer a conspiracy theory. It's a fact. But what do people do with that fact? For some, it became a reason for healthy skepticism. Is this war really necessary, or does someone just want to sell more tanks? That's a reasonable question. It's a democratic discussion. It's a check on power. But for others, it was confirmation of their paranoia. It meant there was a secret force sparking every war just for profit. Vietnam? The mic. Iraq? The mic. Any conflict at all, the mic is pulling the strings from the shadows. That's the trick with real conspiracies. They provide fuel for unreal fantasies. Yes, the mic exists. Yes, there is lobbying. Yes, there are conflicts of interest. But that doesn't mean every war is artificial, or that there are no real threats, or that everything is decided in a closed room between generals and CEOs. The world is more complex than that. But conspiracism hates complexity. Conspiracism takes a real problem and turns it into a mono-explanation. The mic stops being just one factor of foreign policy and becomes the only factor. It's not part of the system, it's the puppet master of the system. And that's convenient because now you don't have to understand geopolitics, history, or ideology. You just have to know that if there's a war, someone is making money off of it. Strangely enough, a real conspiracy can be less dangerous than the myth surrounding it. Because you can investigate, monitor, and reform a real conspiracy. But a myth lives forever. It mutates and feeds on paranoia. And America in the second half of the 20th century was the perfect environment for these myths to mutate. Because at the same time as the mic, there was another real threat. A threat that seemed so massive that any paranoia felt justified. Communism. The Red Scare. And the fear of it gave birth to its own monsters. Imagine America in the 1950s. The smell of fresh-baked pie in the kitchen of a typical suburb, where a housewife is listening to the radio. The sound of children's laughter on the street as boys play cowboys and Indians. You touch a newspaper with a headline in big, bold letters, "Communist Spies in Hollywood." You feel the fear crawling over your skin. What if it's your neighbor? Your colleague? What if? The Cold War wasn't just a geopolitical standoff. It was an ideological battle for souls. The US versus the USSR. Capitalism versus communism. Freedom versus totalitarianism. Or vice versa, depending on which side of the Iron Curtain you were on. But in America, paranoia took a very specific shape. Because the USSR wasn't just an enemy across the ocean. It was an idea that could leak inside. And if an idea can spread, that means there are agents among us. Hidden, sneaky agents. Just waiting for a signal. Senator Joseph McCarthy built his entire career on this fear. In 1950, he claimed that over 200 communists were working in the State Department. There was no evidence and no names, but the panic was real. The witch hunt began. Are you now, or have you ever been, a member of the Communist Party? Who else do you know who sympathizes with communism? Informants, firings ruined careers. Actors, writers, scientists, teachers, everyone was under suspicion. Was it a real conspiracy? Yes and no. Yes, Soviet spies did exist. The Rosenberg case, passing atomic bomb secrets to the USSR, is a fact. The KGB really was recruiting agents of influence in the West. But the scale of the threat was colossally exaggerated. Most of the people who were accused weren't spies at all. Gemini. They were people who had once signed a petition for workers' rights, or attended a lecture on socialism, or simply happened to know someone. McCarthyism showed how the fear of a real threat gives birth to irrational suspicion. And this paranoia becomes a tool of political control. Because when you can accuse someone of communist ties, you can destroy anyone. A troublesome journalist, communist. A government critic, communist propaganda. A workers' strike, organized by Moscow. It's classic conspiracy logic. A real threat becomes an excuse to see threats everywhere. Interestingly, the same thing was happening in the USSR, just mirrored. American spies, CIA agents, hostile elements. The same accusations, the same paranoia, the exact same mechanism of suppression. Two superpowers, two ideologies, two mirrors of paranoia pointed at each other, and both used conspiracy theories as a weapon against their own citizens. By the late 1950s, McCarthy was discredited. His methods were deemed unacceptable, but the consequences remained. The fear of the internal enemy took root in the American consciousness. And this fear would continue to mutate, from communists to terrorists, from Islamists to the deep state. But before that, America would encounter a different phenomenon, one that would undermine trust in the government for decades to come. Because sometimes, the scariest conspiracy is when the government actually is hiding something. Imagine you are a politician in a crisis. The smell of paper and coffee in the office where you're preparing a speech. The sound of phone calls, journalists, the opposition, the public, all demanding answers. You touch the statistics on your desk. Unemployment is rising, crime is up, the people are dissatisfied. What do you say? That the situation is complex and multifaceted, and the solution takes time? Or is it better to point at an enemy? Chapter 2 showed how conspiracy theories evolved from fear into a weapon. In the 19th century, economics became incomprehensible, and bankers became conspirators. In the early 20th century, the Tsarist regime needed a justification for pogroms, and the protocols appeared. The Nazis needed an ideological foundation for genocide, and the protocols became their manifesto. America feared communism, and paranoia became state policy. What unites all these examples? Conspiracies stopped being just an explanation of the world. They became a tool of power. A conspiracy theory is the perfect weapon for a politician. It's simple, it's emotional, and it requires no proof. Suspicion is enough. It provides an enemy that can be hated with impunity. It justifies any action because they started it first, they threaten us, they leave us no choice. And most terrifyingly, a conspiracy theory strips power of responsibility. Economic crisis? It's not our fault, it's the bankers. We're lost? Not our mistake, it's the traders. Social problems? It's not that the system is broken, but that there are enemies among us. But there is a thin line. Real conspiracies exist and real secret operations happen. History knows countless examples where a conspiracy theory turned out to be true. The military-industrial complex is a fact. Soviet spies, a fact. Political corruption, a fact. So how do you distinguish a real conspiracy from paranoia? A real conspiracy has evidence, documents, witnesses, and a logical mechanism. It can be investigated, proven, and punished. Paranoia has only suspicion. They control everything. They hide everything. If there's no evidence, it means they hid it well. A real conspiracy is limited. It has specific perpetrators, specific goals, and a specific time frame. Paranoia is limitless. It explains everything always and everywhere. A real conspiracy can be stopped. Paranoia never can. Because even when the conspirators are gone, paranoia will find new ones. The 20th century showed that conspiracy theories can kill millions. But it also showed that without healthy skepticism, power can do whatever it wants. The balance between critical thinking and paranoia. That is the most difficult task for a democracy. And now we move to the next stage of evolution. Because after World War II, after the Holocaust, and after McCarthyism, Europe and America became more cautious with conspiracies. But the fears didn't disappear. They just changed shape. From racial conspiracies to political ones. From the Jewish threat to the deep state. From pamphlets to television and cinema. And most importantly, a new symbol appeared. A symbol of secrecy, power, and concealment. A symbol that united all fears into a single image. Because what could be scarier than a government that keeps secrets? Imagine Dallas, November 22, 1963. The smell of gasoline from the motorcade driving through the city streets. The sound of the crowd cheering for the president. Applause, shouts of "Jack! Jack!" You are standing on the sidewalk holding a small American flag in your hands. The fabric is cheap, the stick is wooden, and splinters prick your palms. The sun is shining brightly, it's a beautiful day. The president is smiling, waving his hand. Jacqueline is next to him in a pink suit. And then, a shot, a second, a third. Kennedy is killed. Jacqueline tries to climb out of the limo, reaching back for a piece of her husband's skull. Blood on the pink suit. Panic, screams, sirens. And a question that will never be closed. Who and why? The official version is simple. Lee Harvey Oswald, a lone gunman, fired from a window of the Texas School Book Depository. 3 shots from a rifle. The motive? Political fanaticism and mental instability. Oswald is arrested, but 2 days later he is killed by Jack Ruby right inside the police station. On camera. On live TV. And this is where the longest conspiracy theory in American history begins. Because people didn't believe it, they couldn't believe it. How could the President of the United States, the most powerful man on the planet, be killed by one nut with a cheap rifle? Where is the Secret Service? Where is the security? Where were all those safety systems that were supposed to protect him? And why was Oswald killed so quickly, to keep him from telling the truth? The Warren Commission conducted an investigation and confirmed, a lone gunman. But critics found contradictions. The bullet trajectories, the timing of the shots, Kennedy's reaction to the impact, the magic bullet that supposedly pierced both Kennedy and Governor Connally while changing direction in mid-air, the Zapruder film, that amateur footage of the assassination that was scrutinized frame by frame in search of evidence. Hundreds of versions were born. The CIA organized the hit because Kennedy wanted to withdraw troops from Vietnam. The Mafia took revenge for his crackdown on organized crime. The Cubans because of the Bay of Pigs invasion. The KGB because of the Cold War. The military-industrial complex because Kennedy threatened their profits. Even Vice President Lyndon Johnson because he wanted to become president. Every version had its evidence. Every version had its witnesses. Every version had its logic, if you ignored the contradictions. Why did the Kennedy assassination become such a trauma for America? Because it shattered trust. If the President of the United States can be killed in broad daylight, surrounded by security, in front of thousands of people, who is safe? If the government cannot investigate this convincingly, can it be trusted at all? The Kennedy assassination gave birth to the term deep state. The idea that an invisible power exists within the government that makes the real decisions. That presidents are merely puppets, while the true puppet masters hide in the shadows. The CIA, the FBI, the generals, the corporations, all together one big conspiracy. And the worst part is that proving it's not true is impossible, because any debunking can be explained away as part of the cover-up. Was Oswald a lone gunman, or was he a patsy or an agent or controlled or? 60 years have passed and the debate still rages. Because the JFK assassination isn't just a historical event, it's a symbol of America's lost innocence. The moment the nation realized the world is more complex and darker than it seemed. But if the government can hide the truth about the murder of a president, what else is it hiding? Imagine the New Mexico desert. July 1947. The smell of hot sand and sagebrush growing between the stones. The sound of the wind whistling through the cacti. You are a rancher named Mac Brazel. You're walking through the field to check the livestock after a nighttime thunderstorm. Suddenly you see something strange. Debris. Metal sticks, foil-like materials, something that looks like plastic but won't bend. You touch it. It's cold, light, unfamiliar. What is it? Brazel notifies the sheriff. The sheriff calls the Roswell Army Airfield. The military arrives and hauls away the debris. On July 8, 1947, the airbase issues a press release. We have captured a flying saucer. Newspapers explode with headlines. UFO crashes near Roswell. Army captures alien craft. Panic, excitement, phone lines overloaded with calls from journalists. The next day, the military issues a news statement. Sorry, we made a mistake. It was a weather balloon. Seriously? You first say flying saucer, and then weather balloon? And people are supposed to believe that? Of course they didn't. Because when the government changes its story that fast, it means it's hiding something. And if it's hiding something, it must have been something serious. Aliens probably. Yes. Over the years, the Roswell incident theory grew with details. Witnesses claimed they saw not just debris, but the bodies of small gray beings with large heads. That the military took everything, threatened witnesses into silence, and kept it all in a secret place, Area 51. Area 51. Officially, a U.S. Air Force testing range in the Nevada desert. Unofficially, the most classified base in the world. The perimeter is guarded by armed patrols. Flights over the territory are banned. Attempts to trespass result in immediate arrest. For many years, the government didn't even acknowledge the existence of Area 51. Officially, it didn't exist. A white spot on the maps. And that was a mistake. Because the more the government stays silent, the more fantasies are born. Area 51 became the symbol of everything hidden. Supposedly, it houses the wreckage of alien ships. Supposedly, they study alien technology there. Supposedly, they keep live extraterrestrials. Supposedly, they conduct experiments with anti-gravity, teleportation, and time travel. Everything the government hides is there in Area 51. In 2013, the CIA finally officially acknowledged the existence of Area 51. They explained that they tested experimental aircraft there, the U-2 spy plane, the supersonic State Route 71 Blackbird stealth technology. The secrecy was real, but it wasn't about aliens, it was about Soviet spies, the Cold War. If the USSR had learned about these developments, strategic advantage would have been lost. But the explanation came 60 years later. 60 years during which fantasy ran wild. And sometimes, insanely. And here's the irony. The intelligence services themselves fed the UFO myth. Why? Because it was a convenient cover. When a Soviet spy saw a strange object in the sky over Area 51, it was better for them to think aliens than new stealth bomber. When locals reported strange flying lights, the military would hint, Perhaps you saw something unusual, but we cannot comment. A wink, a sense of mystery. Let them believe in aliens. The main thing was that they didn't figure out the real secrets. The conspiracy theory became a tool for disinformation. And it worked perfectly. Roswell and Area 51 showed a new type of paranoia, where real secrecy generates fantastic explanations. The government really was hiding something, but it was planes, not aliens. However, people saw the secrecy and filled the gaps with their own imagination. It's like an empty room behind a locked door. What's in there? Maybe just an empty room. Or maybe a dragon. If the door is never opened, how do you disprove the dragon? But even dragons aren't as scary as what the government was actually doing. Because sometimes real secret programs turn out to be more terrifying than any fantasy. Imagine the basement of a house in an unknown city, the 1950s. The smell of chemicals and damp concrete. The sound of water dripping somewhere in the pipes. You are lying on a metal bed, strapped down with belts. A man in a white coat stands over you holding a syringe. "This will help," he says. You don't know what it is. You didn't give consent. But the substance is injected, and the world begins to melt, colors dance, and sounds become a music of horror. And then questions. Again and again. Days. Weeks. You no longer remember your name. This is not a horror movie script. This is a real secret CIA program called MKUltra. In 1953, the CIA launched a project to study methods of mind control. The goal? Find a way to break a person, force them to tell the truth, erase memory, reprogram the personality. The Cold War was in full swing, and American intelligence feared the USSR and China were developing brainwashing techniques for prisoners. They had to catch up. MKUltra experimented with everything that could affect the psyche. LSD, mescaline, barbiturates, amphetamines, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, electroshock, psychological abuse, torture, manipulation. Any method from chemistry and psychology to physics. The projects had code names, budgets were secret, results were classified. Most horrifyingly, the experiments weren't just conducted on enemy agents or volunteers. They were done on random people. Patients in psychiatric hospitals, prisoners, prostitutes, soldiers who weren't told what they were being given. In some cases, just civilians who had LSD slipped into their drinks in bars to observe the reaction. One of the experiments, CIA agents rented an apartment in San Francisco. They hired prostitutes to lure clients there, then gave them LSD and watched through a one-way mirror. Research you see. Frank Olson, a biochemist working for the Army, was given a dose of LSD without his knowledge. A week later he fell out of a hotel window in New York. The official version, suicide. The unofficial, either he was pushed or the LSD shattered his psyche so much that he lost control of his actions. The program lasted 20 years. Then, in 1973, CIA Director Richard Helms ordered all MKUltra documents destroyed. Most files were burned, but some accidentally survived due to an archival error. In 1975, the Church Committee, investigating intelligence agency abuses, revealed the existence of MKUltra to the public. The scandal was enormous. Congressional hearings, government apologies, compensation to victims. Of course, only to those who survived and could prove their participation. And here's what's important. MKUltra was not a conspiracy theory. It was a real government program that was later exposed. Imagine how this affected trust. If the government actually conducted mind control experiments on its own citizens, why not believe it's doing something else right now? If the CIA really gave people drugs without their consent, why not believe theories about chemtrails, water fluoridation, or vaccines with chips? MKUltra became the proof for conspiracists. You say it's paranoia, but MKUltra was true, so everything else could be true too. This is a classic problem. When a real conspiracy is exposed, it legitimizes all other suspicions, even the absurd ones. Because the logic is simple. If they lied once, they can lie always. And that's a fair point. Trust is hard to build and easy to destroy. When the authorities really do hide something, when they really do something terrible, paranoia becomes a rational reaction. But there is a limit. MKUltra was a horrific program, but it had specific documents, specific perpetrators, and a specific period. It was investigated, acknowledged, and condemned. It is a real conspiracy. But the theory that the government is still controlling everyone through microwaves and 5G, that is paranoia. The first has evidence. The second has only fear. But how is an average person supposed to tell one from the other when the government has proven it can lie for decades? Imagine a hotel conference room in the Swiss Alps, 1954. The smell of expensive cigars and polished wood. The sound of hushed conversations between the most influential people in the world. politicians, bankers, industrialists, kings. You are a security guard standing at the door. You know that inside they are discussing the future of Europe, transatlantic relations, and the economy. You touch the list of participants. The paper is expensive, the names are legendary. But the list is classified, the press is not allowed. Not a word about the content of the conversations goes out. This is the Bilderberg Club, an annual private conference of the global elite. Officially, it's an informal forum for the exchange of ideas. Unofficially, it's the same but with an added nuance. Why the secrecy? If it's just an exchange of ideas, why not let journalists in? Why have the participant lists been hidden for years? Why does no one report what is discussed there? And here, a new great conspiracy theory is born. The New World Order. The idea is simple and terrifying at the same time. There exists a global elite, bankers, politicians, corporations, monarchs, who are secretly planning to unite the world under a single totalitarian government. To liquidate national states, abolish borders, and create a worldwide dictatorship under the control of the chosen few. The Bilderberg Club, the Trilateral Commission, the Council on Foreign Relations, the World Economic Forum in Davos, all of these are supposedly the instruments of this conspiracy. Why do people believe this? Because these organizations actually exist, they actually gather influential people, they actually discuss global issues, and they actually do it privately. But from a real fact grows a fantastic explanation. Yes, elites gather. Yes, they discuss politics. But is it a conspiracy for world domination? Or is that just how the world works? Influential people communicate with each other, lobby for interests, and coordinate actions. The difference between an informal influence network and a secret world government is massive. But conspiracism doesn't like nuances. The New World Order theory absorbed all previous fears. The Jesuits are part of the NWO. The Illuminati, part of the NWO. The Masons, part of the NWO. The Rothschild bankers, of course part of the NWO. Add to this the UN, the European Union, NATO, the WHO, or any international organization, and it automatically becomes an instrument of the conspiracy. It's like a conspiratorial Swiss Army knife, a universal tool for explaining everything. An economic crisis? That's the NWO destroying national economies to make it easier to seize control. Or, again, the NWO creating chaos to establish order. That's the NWO removing obstacles to globalization. A pandemic? The NWO testing methods of population control. The most interesting part is that the term New World Order was actually used by politicians. George H.W. Bush in 1991, after the collapse of the USSR, spoke of a New World Order, meaning a new era of international cooperation after the Cold War. An innocent phrase, an optimistic vision. But for conspiracists, it was like a confession. Aha, they admitted the conspiracy themselves. The problem with the NWO theory is that it is unfalsifiable. It is impossible to disprove. Any argument against it becomes proof of the conspiracy. You say the NWO doesn't exist? Of course you'd say that because you're part of the system. Or, of course because you've been deceived by propaganda. Or, of course because you haven't researched enough yet. This is no longer a theory. It is a faith. It is religious in its structure. There is an omnipotent evil, the elite. There are prophets, the awakened conspiracists. There are sacred texts, leaked documents, video evidence. There is an apocalypse, the establishment of the NWO. And there is salvation, the awakening of the masses. And like any faith, it provides comfort. The world is complex, chaotic, and unfair. But if the NWO is behind everything, then at least there is an explanation. It's not randomness, not mistakes, not the structural problems of capitalism, but an evil with a face. And you can fight it. You just need to wake up. But what if the world is actually just complex? What if elites really do influence politics, but not through a single conspiratorial center, but through thousands of local interests that sometimes align and sometimes conflict? What if injustice isn't a product of a conspiracy, but a product of the system we all support? These questions are harder. They don't offer simple answers, so it's more convenient to believe in the NWO. And what if the blame lies not with the elites, but with the very technologies we've created? Imagine Nikola Tesla's laboratory. New York, the beginning of the 20th century. The smell of ozone from electrical discharges, the hum of transformers. The sound of lightning he creates artificially. The crackle, the hiss, the magical glow. You touch a metal coil, it vibrates, warm, and the air around it is electrified. Your hair stands on end. Tesla stands in the center. A genius, an eccentric, a visionary. He talks about free energy for the whole world, about the wireless transmission of electricity, about how humanity can live without oil, coal, and the greed of corporations. And then his funding is cut off. Projects are shut down. He dies in poverty in a hotel room. His documents are confiscated by the FBI. What? The conspiracy theory says it's because his inventions threatened the oil magnates. Because J.P. Morgan and other industrialists couldn't make money off of free energy. Because the system doesn't allow true geniuses to change the world. Tesla knew too much. He could have liberated humanity, so they destroyed him. They hid him. They forgot him. It's a beautiful story. Tragic, romantic, and almost entirely false. Tesla was indeed a genius. His inventions changed the world. Alternating current, radio, the foundations of wireless communication. But his later projects, including free energy, didn't work. Not because they were suppressed, but because they contradicted the laws of physics. Energy cannot be free, it must always have a source. Tesla believed in the possibility of drawing energy from the ether, from space, from the Earth's magnetic field. But the ether doesn't exist. It's an outdated 19th century scientific concept. His funding didn't stop because of a conspiracy, but because investors grew tired of pouring money into projects that yielded no results. Morgan funded Tesla for years, but when it became clear there would be no commercial product, he stopped. Nothing personal. Just business. Not a conspiracy. Tesla's documents were confiscated by the FBI after his death in 1943. But not because of free energy, because of the war. Tesla was born in Serbia, was a foreigner, and worked on technologies that could have military applications. Standard procedure. Most of the documents were returned to his family a few years later. They are now in a museum in Belgrade. No one is hiding anything. But the myth of Tesla is more beautiful than the truth. And he isn't the only one. Stanley Meyer, who supposedly invented a water-powered engine, turned out to be a fraud. His invention didn't work, he was simply soliciting investments. He died of a brain aneurysm, but the conspiracy theory says the oil companies poisoned him. There are countless inventors of perpetual motion machines, who supposedly created free energy but were suppressed. In every case, either the physics doesn't add up or it's blatant fraud. Why are these stories popular? Because they provide heroes and villains. The lone genius against the evil corporation. Progress against greed. Hope against the system. It's a perfect narrative. But it doesn't match reality. Reality is more complex and more somber. Progress isn't stopped by conspiracies. Progress is stopped by physics, economics, and technological limitations. Yes, corporations lobby for their interest. Yes, the oil industry slowed the transition to renewable energy. But that isn't a conspiracy against individual inventors. It's a systemic struggle for markets, for profits, for power. And here is the saddest part. When people believe in hidden technologies, they stop working on real solutions. Why develop solar panels if Tesla's free energy supposedly already exists and is just being hidden? Why invest in science if all breakthrough discoveries are suppressed? The myth of hidden technologies isn't hope for progress. It's an excuse for the lack of progress. But if technology won't save us, if elites run the world, if the government lies, then who actually controls our lives? Imagine you are an American who grew up in the 1950s. The smell of fresh-baked pie in the suburbs, the sound of children laughing on the street. You touch the morning newspaper. The paper is clean, the news is hopeful. The president smiles from the front page. America is the strongest country in the world. Democracy has defeated fascism. The future is bright. Trust in the government is absolute. Now, imagine you are that same American in the 1970s. The president was assassinated, and you aren't sure who is to blame. The government has admitted to conducting mind control experiments on its own citizens. Vietnam was lost after years of lies about victory. Watergate proved that a president can be a criminal. Trust is shattered. The world no longer makes sense. Chapter 3 showed how America lost its innocence. The Kennedy assassination became a symbol. If they can kill the president, no one is protected. Roswell and Area 51 showed that the government can hide the truth for decades. MKUltra proved that conspiracy theories sometimes turn out to be true. The New World Order, NWO, unified all fears into a single global narrative. The myth of Tesla showed that it's more convenient for people to believe in a conspiracy than in a complex reality. This wasn't paranoia without cause. There were real grounds for distrust. The government actually lied. The intelligence agencies actually did horrific things. Elites actually influenced politics from the shadows. But from these real problems grew fantastic explanations. From a distrust of authority grew a paranoia toward everything. From critical thinking to conspiratorial thinking. The American myth of conspiracy theories is a myth of lost freedom. It's about a country that wanted to be a beacon of democracy but became a battlefield of suspicion, where anyone could be an agent, every event a part of a plan, and every explanation a lie. And the most terrifying thing is that once trust is destroyed, it is incredibly hard to restore. Because even when the government tells the truth, how can you believe it? Even when the facts are obvious, how can you accept them? If you've been deceived once, you suspect forever. It's a survivor's bias in reverse. We remember MKUltra, Watergate, and the Vietnam lies, but we forget the thousands of instances where the government told the truth, where investigations were honest, and where the system actually worked. We remember the betrayals and project them onto everything. The 20th century created the template, they are always lying. And the 21st century took that template and moved it into the digital world. Because now, conspiracy theories no longer need books, newspapers, or television. Now they live on the internet, where everyone can be a researcher, where every theory finds its audience, and where algorithms amplify what you already believe. How did conspiracies evolve in the era of social media? Imagine an ordinary evening in the 2010s. The smell of coffee cooling on the table, the sound of notifications on your phone, vibration after vibration, alert after alert. You touch the screen. The glass is smooth, warm from your fingers, glowing with a blue light that ruins your sleep. You scroll the feed. News, memes, photos of friends, ads. A little more. A little more. 2 hours have passed. You only meant to check it quickly. The algorithm knows you better than you know yourself. Before the internet, conspiracy theories spread slowly, through a book, a pamphlet, a VHS tape. You had to find a source, buy it, and read it. There were barriers, time, effort, geography. If you lived in a small town and believed in a Masonic conspiracy, where would you find like-minded people? Maybe one or two eccentrics in the whole region. But social networks destroyed all barriers. Now, if you believe in a conspiracy, you just type a query into a search bar. In seconds, you find thousands of people who believe the same thing. Groups, forums, channels, chats. You are no longer alone. You are part of an awakened community. You exchange evidence, videos, articles, and screenshots. You support each other. You create an echo chamber where your faith is constantly reinforced. And this is where the algorithm kicks in. Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, X. All these platforms live off your attention. The longer you stay on the platform, the more ads you see, and the more money the company makes. Therefore, the algorithm is optimized for one thing: keeping you there as long as possible. And what captures attention best? Emotions. Anger, fear, indignation, shock. A boring fact won't hold you. But a conspiratorial video with a headline like, "Were you lied to? The truth about." Well, the algorithm knows this. It sees that when you watch one video about a conspiracy theory, you stay to watch the next. So it offers you more. More and more. You watch a video about UFOs? Here's a video about reptilians. You watch the reptilians? Here is the flat earth. You watch flat earth? Here is QAnon. This is called a recommendation funnel. You start with light curiosity, and in a few weeks, you find yourself deep in a radical conspiracy theory. Not because you are stupid, but because the algorithm leads you there, because that is where you spend the most time. Studies have shown that YouTube can lead a person from a video about a diet to a video about neo-Nazism in just 5 recommendation steps. Not intentionally, but simply because the algorithm looks for similar content that holds attention. And here is the irony. Tech companies don't want to spread conspiracism. They don't care what you believe in. They only want your attention. But their algorithms, optimized for maximum engagement, automatically amplify the most emotional content. And the most emotional content is always conspiracism, scandals, and fears. Social networks don't create conspiracy theories, but they create the perfect environment for their spread. Like greenhouse conditions for a virus. Before the internet, conspiracism was marginal. Now it is mainstream. Before the internet, a conspiracy theory lived in the books of a few thousand fans. Now it gathers millions of views in a single day. And the next step was gamification. Because someone realized that if you present a conspiracy theory as a game, people won't just become believers, they'll become active players. Imagine an ordinary day in October 2017. The smell of popcorn popping in the microwave while you sit at your computer. The sound of clicking keys. You are on the 4chan forum, an anonymous image board where internet trolls, gamers, and conspiracists gather. You touch the mouse, the plastic is cold, the cursor glides across the screen. You read a new post from a user named Q Clearance Patriot. He writes in riddles, hints, and questions. Who controls the FBI? Why is Clinton still free? Trust the plan. And you start to play. QAnon is no ordinary conspiracy theory. It's an interactive puzzle game where you are the detective uncovering the mystery of the century. The story started simply: an anonymous user calling himself Q, who supposedly has access to top-secret US government materials, Q clearance, began publishing cryptic messages, Q drops, or crumbs. They were intentionally vague. Phrases like, "Why did Obama go to Saudi Arabia?" or "Follow the money. The future proves the past." What does that mean? Nothing concrete. But that was the genius of it. Because when a message is unclear, you fill in the gaps yourself. You look for evidence, connections, coincidences. You feel smart when you solve the puzzle. You become part of a community of researchers who see the truth. The central theory of QAnon goes like this: there is a secret global elite of satanic pedophiles, including Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, George Soros, and Hollywood celebrities, who control the world and kidnap children for horrific rituals. But Donald Trump is a secret hero leading a war against this elite. Q is an insider from his team, preparing patriots for the Great Awakening, when all the criminals will be arrested. It sounds absurd, of course, but the structure of the game makes it convincing. Every Q drop is a puzzle. You analyze, interpret, and discuss it with other anons. When something in the news coincides with what Q wrote weeks ago, it's proof. When it doesn't coincide, disinformation was necessary. Any result confirms the theory. It's like a video game with infinite levels. There is always a new crumb, a new riddle, a new plot twist. You never win completely, but you're always on the verge of a massive discovery. QAnon spread virally. From 4chan to Reddit, from Reddit to Facebook, from Facebook to YouTube. Millions of followers worldwide. They appeared at Trump rallies with signs saying WWG1WG. Where we go one, we go all. They stormed the Capitol on January 6, 2021, believing the plan was nearing completion. But the plan never happened. Trump lost the election, mass arrests didn't occur, and Q stopped posting. But the believers didn't disappear. Because when you've invested years of your life into solving a puzzle, when you've found a community, an identity, and a sense of purpose, it's hard to just walk away. Some move to new theories. Some are waiting for the next stage of the plan. Some are disillusioned but stay silent because they're ashamed to admit they believed it. QAnon showed that 21st century conspiracism is not just a belief. It's a game. It's a community. It's an identity. It's a way to feel special, awakened, a hero in a world that feels chaotic and meaningless. But there is another type of conspiracism, not about the global elite but about your own body and why you can't trust it. Imagine a doctor's office 2020. The stinging smell of disinfectant in your nose. The sound of a syringe sliding out of its packaging. Plastic, metal, the liquid inside. You sit in the chair, rolling up your sleeve. The doctor says the COVID-19 vaccine is safe. But you remember what you read online last night. Experimental technology, tracking chips, irreversible side effects, mass murder disguised as vaccination. You touch the spot where they are about to inject you. Your skin is warm, alive. You feel your heartbeat, your fear. Is it worth trusting? The anti-vaccination movement isn't new. It has existed since vaccines were invented in the 18th century. People have always been afraid of injecting something foreign into their bodies. This is a natural, evolutionary fear. But the internet and the COVID-19 pandemic amplified this movement to the level of a global phenomenon. It all started with one fraudulent article. In 1998, British Dr. Andrew Wakefield published a study that supposedly linked the MMR vaccine, measles, mumps, rubella, to autism in children. The article was small, the sample size was only 12 children, and the methodology was terrible. But the media grabbed the sensation. Later it was revealed that Wakefield had forged the data. He had a financial conflict of interest. He was developing an alternative vaccine and wanted to discredit his competitors. He was stripped of his medical license, the article was retracted, and dozens of studies disproved the link between vaccines and autism. But it was too late. The myth had taken root. Parents began refusing to vaccinate their children. Measles, which had been almost eradicated in developed countries, began to return. Outbreaks of epidemics, deaths of children that could have been prevented. And then came COVID-19. And anti-vaccination exploded. The pandemic created a perfect storm for conspiracism. Fear, uncertainty, the rapid development of a vaccine, usually it takes years. Here, months. Governments introducing mandatory vaccinations. Restrictions of freedom, lockdowns, masks. For some, this looked like the beginning of a dictatorship. Conspiracy theories bloomed like mushrooms after rain. The vaccine contains microchips to track people. Disproven, a chip won't fit through a needle. The vaccine changes DNA. Disproven, mRNA does not integrate into the genome. The vaccine is a tool for depopulation to reduce the Earth's population. Disproven, no evidence of mass mortality. But facts don't work against fear. Because anti-vaccination isn't about science. It's about trust. And trust is shattered. Why don't people trust vaccines? Because they don't trust governments. Because they remember that pharmaceutical companies have repeatedly hidden dangerous side effects for profit. Because they remember MKUltra and the Tuskegee experiments, where the US government observed African American men with syphilis without treating them to study the disease's progression. Because they see experts contradicting each other. Because they feel they are being coerced, not convinced. And when trust is shattered, even good science looks suspicious. Anti-vaccination shows a tragic irony. The more the government tries to force people to vaccinate, the more resistance there is. The more they censor disinformation, the more people believe the truth is being hidden. It's like a spring, the harder you press, the harder it pushes back. But there are theories where distrust goes even further. Where it's not just the government or science being questioned, but reality itself. Imagine looking at the horizon. The smell of sea salt, the sound of waves crashing on the shore. You stand on the beach, touching the sand, warm, grainy, trickling through your fingers. You look into the distance where the sky meets the water. The line is perfectly straight, flat. You've seen thousands of photos of the Earth from space. A blue sphere, clouds, continents. But here is the question. Have you personally been to space? Have you personally measured the curvature of the Earth? Or did you just believe what the experts told you? The flat Earth movement isn't about geography, it's about a distrust of any authority whatsoever. The idea that the Earth is flat seems absurd. It was disproven before the Common Era. Eratosthenes measured the Earth's circumference in the 3rd century BCE just by comparing shadows in different cities. Ships disappear over the horizon gradually from the bottom up because the Earth is curved. Different constellations in the northern and southern hemispheres. Photos from space, the ISS broadcasting live, thousands of proofs. But flat earthers say all this evidence is part of a conspiracy. NASA is lying. Photos are faked. The ISS is CGI. Astronauts are actors. The governments of every country have agreed to hide the truth. What? Versions vary. Some say it's to control humanity through lies. Some say it's to hide the edge of the world and the firmament. Some say it's so NASA can steal billions of dollars for fake space programs. Logic doesn't work against flat earthers. Because any counter-argument can be dismissed with the phrase, "That's just what they taught you." You show a photo of the Earth from space? Photoshop. You refer to physics? Physics is also part of the deception. You suggest measuring the curvature yourself? Measuring instruments can also be falsified. This is not a theory that can be disproven. It is a belief system immune to facts. Why do people believe in a flat Earth? Not because of stupidity. Many flat earthers are educated people who conduct their own research. But their problem isn't intelligence. It's epistemology, the way they determine what is true. For them, truth is only what you have verified yourself. Not what a professor, a scientist, or the government said. Because all of them can lie. They've lied before, and here they cite MKUltra, Watergate, and cancer research. Therefore, the only way to know the truth is to verify it personally. But personally verifying the shape of the Earth is difficult. You need specialized equipment, knowledge of physics, and access to space. Most people don't have that. So they rely on scientific consensus, trust in experts. Flat earthers reject this trust. And there is a certain logic to it. If experts were wrong before, and they were, as science constantly corrects itself, why trust them now? The problem is that when you reject all authorities, you fall into a vacuum and fill it with your own fantasies. Because an absence of structure is not freedom, it is chaos. The brain cannot exist without explanations for the world. So, if you don't believe in science, you will build your own science, even if it contradicts reality. Flat Earth is the extreme manifestation of an epistemological crisis. When society loses trust in institutions, the individual is forced to build their own picture of the world. And if that person lacks critical thinking tools, they will build an absurd one. But even in this absurdity, there is a deep psychological need. Flat Earthers are not insane. They are looking for the same thing the Jesuit phobes of the 17th century sought, what believers in the protocol sought, and what QAnon followers seek. They are looking for meaning, control, and the feeling that the world has an order. even if that order is a conspiracy. Because a conspiracy is better than chaos. And this leads us to the most important question. Why does the human brain love conspiracy theories so much? Imagine you are a primitive human, thousands of years ago. The smell of a bonfire, smoke driving away insects. The sound of rustling in the bushes, something is moving. You reach for your spear. The wood is smooth, sharpened, heavy. Your heart beats faster. What's there? A predator? A hostile clan? The wind? You have two types of errors. First, deciding it's a danger when it's actually just the wind, a false alarm. Second, deciding it's the wind when it's actually a tiger, a missed threat. Which option is evolutionarily more beneficial? The first, because a false alarm only costs you extra stress, while a missed threat costs you your life. Therefore, our brains are wired to see threats even where there are none. This is called hyperactive agency detection. We are inclined to see intentions, plans, and the actions of agents, people, gods, spirits, even in random events. Because it's better to be safe than sorry. This same logic fuels conspiracy theories. The world is complex, events seem random and unfair. But our brain seeks an explanation. And it finds it in agents, people who plan it all. An economic crisis? Not a complex interaction of markets, politics, and chance, but a plan by bankers. A pandemic? Not a natural process of virus evolution, but a deliberate release from a lab. Elections lost? Not because the majority voted differently but because of fraud. A conspiracy theory simplifies the world. It provides a clear enemy instead of abstract processes. It turns chaos into a narrative, and a narrative is always more comfortable than chaos. But there is another psychological factor, the need to feel special. When you believe in a conspiracy theory, you aren't just one of the crowd, you are awakened. You see what others don't. You have access to secret knowledge. You are the hero in your own story fighting against dark forces. This gives life meaning. It gives you an identity. This works especially well for people who feel powerless. If you lost your job, if your social status is low, if life feels meaningless, a conspiracy theory provides an explanation. It's not that you are a failure, it's that the system is against you. The elite took away your opportunities, but you know the truth and that makes you stronger than them. This is a compensatory function. A conspiracy theory returns a sense of control to those who have lost it. Studies show that people prone to conspiracism often have a low tolerance for uncertainty. They cannot accept that sometimes bad things just happen. They need a reason, even if that reason is an evil plot. Another factor is social isolation. People with fewer social ties are more likely to believe in conspiracies because the conspiratorial community becomes their family. They finally belong to something important. And most interestingly, intelligence does not protect against conspiracism. On the contrary, smart people are often better at rationalizing their irrational beliefs. They find evidence, build complex arguments, and defend the theory against criticism. Intelligence without critical thinking is just a more effective tool for self-deception. Can you cure a conspiracy believer? It's difficult because facts don't work. When you show a debunking, it is perceived as part of the conspiracy. When you criticize the theory, it strengthens group solidarity. They are attacking us because we are close to the truth. The only way is to restore trust and social ties. To show that the world is complex but not necessarily hostile. That uncertainty is natural but not fatal. That one can be special without secret knowledge. But that is long, hard work. It's much easier to just find a new conspiracy theory. So, what have we learned throughout this journey across centuries of paranoia? Imagine you are sitting at night again, scrolling your feed. The smell of coffee, the sound of notifications, the touch of the cold glass screen. But now you know the history. You know that the fear of secret power has always existed. That every era created its own conspirators. That conspiracism is not a deviation but a part of human nature. We have come a long way. From the Jesuits who supposedly controlled kings. To the Illuminati who existed for only 10 years but lived forever in fantasies. To the Masons who were blamed for everything, revolutions and counter-revolutions alike. To the bankers who became a symbol of economic fears. To the protocols, a forgery that killed millions. To Nazism, which turned a conspiracy into genocide. We saw an America that passed through the trauma of distrust. Kennedy, Roswell, Area 51, MKUltra. Real secrets and fantastic explanations. The military-industrial complex and the Red Scare. Fears that became tools of control. The New World Order, the theory that unified all previous fears into one global narrative. We entered the digital age. Social networks, algorithms that amplify phobias, QAnon, which turned conspiracy into a game, anti-vaxxers fighting science, and the flat earth, the ultimate manifestation of total distrust. But we've only touched the tip of the iceberg. Hundreds of other theories exist. Reptilians supposedly running governments while disguised as humans. Chemtrails, the traces of planes supposedly spraying chemicals to control the population. The moon landing conspiracy, the claim that the 1969 landing was filmed in a studio, perhaps even by Stanley Kubrick. 9/11 as an inside job by the US government. HAARP, a weather and mind control system. Red mercury, a mythical substance supposedly used in secret weapons. 5G towers supposedly spreading disease or controlling minds. Every era generates new versions of old fears. Technologies change. Paranoia remains. And we have understood the main point. Conspiracy theories are not about facts, they are about psychology. They give meaning to chaos, they return control to the powerless, they create a community for the lonely, they turn randomness into narrative, complexity into simplicity, and uncertainty into certainty. But they also kill. The protocols led to the Holocaust, anti-vaccination led to the return of epidemics, QAnon led to the storming of the Capitol. Conspiracy theories are not innocent, they have consequences. So how do we live in a world where trust is shattered, where there is too much information, and where algorithms amplify the most emotional content? There is no simple answer, but there are a few principles. Distinguish between healthy skepticism and suspicion. Thinking critically means asking questions, looking for evidence, and checking sources. But it does not mean rejecting all facts that don't fit into a favorite theory. A real conspiracy has evidence, witnesses, and a logical mechanism. Paranoia has only suspicion and fear. Acknowledge complexity. The world is not run by a single secret power. The world is millions of actors with their own interests, which sometimes align and sometimes conflict. Injustice isn't always the result of a conspiracy. Often, it's the result of a system we all support. Build rational trust. Not blind trust in authority, but trust in processes. Science works because it is self-correcting. Democracy works because it has mechanisms of oversight. Institutions are imperfect, but it is better to have imperfect institutions than only irrational fear. Remember the survivor's bias. We remember MKUltra and Watergate, the conspiracies that turned out to be true, but we forget the thousands of theories that turned out to be absurd. We remember the betrayals but forget the millions of times the system worked honestly. Acknowledge uncertainty. Sometimes we don't know the answer. Sometimes the world is unfair without a global cause. Sometimes bad things just happen. And that's okay. Uncertainty doesn't mean helplessness, it means humanity. The history of conspiracy theories is the history of human fear. Fear of the unknown, of losing control, of complexity. This fear is natural, but when it turns into a phobia, it destroys more than any real conspiracy ever could. So, the next time you see a video with the title, "Were you lied to?" The truth about, take a pause. Think, check the sources, ask questions. Imagine you wake up tomorrow morning. The smell of fresh coffee, the sound of birds outside the window. You reach for your phone, the screen is cold, but for the first time in a long while, you don't automatically scroll the feed. You pause. You think, what do I want to know? Why do I want to know it? Whom do I trust? The history of conspiracy theories has taught us many things. That the fear of the unknown is natural, that the search for control is human, and that the need for simple explanations is universal. But also, that paranoia can kill, that distrust can destroy, and that the complexity of the world does not mean it is hostile. We live in an era where there is too much information and too little trust. Where everyone can become a researcher, but not everyone has the tools to distinguish truth from lies. Where algorithms know our fears better than we do and feed us exactly what reinforces them. But we also live in an era where real conspiracies can be exposed, where documents are declassified, where journalists investigate, and where the system, though imperfect, still has mechanisms for self-correction. The question isn't whether conspiracies exist. They do. The question is how to not let someone else's phobias, or our own, replace critical thinking. And sometimes truth is indeed scarier than any fiction. The question is how to tell one from the other. Thank you for taking this long journey through centuries of fear and conspiracy with me. If you enjoyed this, support it with a like and a subscription. And be sure to write in the comments. What conspiracy theories did you once believe in? What made you change your mind? Or perhaps you still believe in something that others call conspiracism? Let's discuss it, without judgment, just as people looking for answers in a complex world. And also, what historical secrets or mysteries interest you for the next video? Your ideas could become the topic of the next story. May you dream not of conspiracies but of clear answers. Good night, friends, and interesting dreams.